let's hand the mic over to you and move to the second part of the program.
Sounds good. I mentioned Stephen Fidel Herraiz earlier, and as soon as I met him, I could see how enthusiastic he was about doing research about Irish Hill. And it really is research that nobody has done before. I ran into a couple people that work in libraries that I referred Stephen to, and they said, wow, that guy is so enthusiastic, it's really fun working with him. And again, I think it just shows what one person can do when they set their mind to it and when they have a love of history. So, without further ado, Stephen Fidel Herraiz.
Good evening, everyone. I have never considered myself a historian, but while running down Illinois Street, I saw a bluff, and I didn't understand why this strange-looking cliff was there that looked like someone had just chopped the edge of it off with an axe. So I started doing some research, and I went to the library, as Peter said, and it just started, and I thought, well, like anything else, I'll get sick of this in a month or two and move on. That was a year ago, so I'm still in it. And I've learned a lot about Irish Hill, and I'm here to talk to you about that tonight. What you're looking at right now, we'll be looking at again later. This is a panorama that is taken from a hill that no longer exists on 3rd Street. And what you're looking at is 20th Street going down to the bay. And you can see 20th Street right here. This is 20th going to the bay. 22nd would be over here, and this is Illinois. This is 3rd. So you can see that an entire neighborhood existed in 1892. This was a business district. Over here was another district that had saloons and cottages up on a hill. What I found was it was very difficult to research a place that no buildings exist in anymore, and 75% of the streets no longer exist, and the physical hill itself no longer exists. So it was, I likened it to researching a ghost town that is invisible. There's not a lot to go on. So this is probably one of the first pictures of Irish Hill that I saw, and this is what led me on my quest for information. What we're looking at now is what we see of Irish Hill right now. You can see that there is a hill, and it has a slight elevation. This is the part of the hill, you see the blue serpentinite rock that was pretty much a trademark of Irish Hill. The hill went up this way to another elevation about here, and then went all the way down to the bay, probably at about 90 feet at its highest elevation, so it was a very large hill. What we're looking at now is a current day map showing Irish Hill in the black. You can see it's an L-shaped rock. Most of what you see near the bay is landfill. Probably in the late 1800s, the bay was probably about right here, but as you can see, fill has been added in to help the shipbuilding industries and other industries to expand. Here we are at 20th Street again. This would be Dogpatch. Potrero Hill would be down here. Here's the 280. You can see that the hill is a very small portion here. This would be the machine shop. Originally, the hill started here, went like this. This was all the hill, all the way down to about here. And we're going to see the original size of the hill in the next. So that's the original shape of Irish Hill, and you can see that it was substantially bigger, and little by little, over the years, the shipbuilding industry and other industries had been just taking pieces of it so that they could expand their operations. There were two distinct areas of Irish Hill. There is a business district here, right along, Napa, which is 20th Street and Illinois. There was a small business district that went up this way, went up the hill about here. This is the existing hill. There was another area, a smaller area up here. What's strange about this area is that the only way you could get to it was you had to take a little path that was Michigan Street. It was not paved. You took it up the hill, and then you went this way, you went east, and there was this little area here that had saloons and boarding houses and a few cottages. What I couldn't figure out when looking at maps was that the topography is so drastically different today, I couldn't really wrap my mind around what this place must have looked at. So I studied fire maps, and I found that if you were going down 22nd Street today, right here would be the PG&E plant. So you're coming down 22nd, here's the PG&E plant. Well, you couldn't get to Sierra Street or 22nd at this intersection because right here was a 90-foot cliff that rose perpendicular to the street. So you couldn't even get through. The only way to get up on this bluff was, like I said, that kind of funny little path that went up Michigan Street. There were also 98 stairs right here that led up to the path, and apparently those stairs at night were very treacherous because hoodlums would hang out there and wait for drunken people to stumble down the stairs, and people would get robbed there a lot. The topography of Irish Hill was very interesting in that there were such really dramatic hills and really dramatic cliffs that a lot of injuries happened when people fell off those cliffs. There were certain places where if you wanted to see your friend that lived in the next block, you couldn't just walk down the block. You would walk a certain distance and then take a suspension bridge over a little valley to get to the other side of the street. So there are very few pictures that exist, very few photos that exist of Irish Hill. So I've read a lot in newspaper articles, and it sounded like a really beautiful place. A lot of little cottages, a lot of saloons, boarding houses. So here's the panorama again, and you can see that the business district is pretty big. I mean, for an area of its size, it was actually founded, Irish Hill was settled before Dogpatch was, so Dogpatch is over here. There are buildings over here on this part of Irish Hill as early as 1860. They appear in some photographs. So these buildings, there was a hotel up here called the San Quentin House, and it was one of the earliest boarding houses on Irish Hill. And the owner of the San Quentin House, it was named that way because he hired convicts that had just gotten out of San Quentin to work for him. So it probably wasn't the nicest place to stay. It had a very bad reputation. There was a saloon across the street that hosted bare knuckle boxing matches every Saturday. So if you went to one saloon, you would fight against guys from another saloon in this bare knuckle boxing match. It was right in the middle of the street. And the winners would buy the losers 5-cent steam beers at the other guy's bar, so the other guy would get money too. Okay, so this is, like I said, there are so few photos of Irish Hill because it was a working class neighborhood. It wasn't picturesque. It wasn't like Fisherman's Wharf or any of the other areas in San Francisco that there are pictures of. This is an illustration of the Union Iron Works, which was one of the major employers of the people who lived in Irish Hill. The people that lived in Irish Hill worked in shipbuilding industries that were located here at Potrero Point. When I found this illustration, I was impressed by how big the hill was. I mean, it went all the way to the bay. This is all the hill. This would be 20th Street right here, 22nd. This is Michigan, Illinois would be here, Dogpatch over here. But just the size of the hill is pretty awesome, and you can see already what's been cut from the hill. When the Union Iron Works built its foundry here in 1883, it was actually built on fill land too. So Irish Hill had a history of being taken away, hauled off, and dumped into places for fill. In fact, Mission Bay is primarily made from fill that came from Irish Hill. This is a census report, and this is a census report from 1900. In 1900, approximately 1,000 people lived on Irish Hill. So I took a small sample of those people. I took like 150. I'm still going through the census results. As you can see, they're handwritten and they're really hard to read. Some of the categories, it's very sad, some of the categories are number of children and then number of children not living. And it just struck me that this was a sign of the times in 1900. Of the 150-person sample that I took, 100 were adults and 50 were children. So a lot of children lived on Irish Hill, and they went to the Irving Scott Elementary School that was in Dogpatch. Out of the 50 children that were living in that little sample area, 10 of them had jobs. They were, one of the girls was a glove maker. There were boys who lied about their age so that they could get jobs at the Union Iron Works, and they would just be like little apprentices, but they would make really great money doing that. So a lot of the kids lied about their ages to get jobs. Oh, this guy. Okay, this is Frank McManus, and he is probably the most well-known person on Irish Hill. He was known as the king of the Potrero, and he was a first-generation Irish immigrant. He came to this country with his brothers, made a fortune in the silver mine somehow, buying and trading stocks. He made a lot of money, took care of his brothers, got them real cushy jobs. He opened a place called the Union Hotel, which was one of the longest-standing hotels on Irish Hill. Now, if you wanted to get a job at the Union Iron Works, which is right across the street, you had to go through Frank McManus. And if you didn't go through Frank McManus, you didn't get a job at the Union Iron Works. And you also had to stay at his hotel, the Union Hotel, and you had to drink in his saloon, which was on the ground floor. It was very typical in those days to have boarding houses and hotels that had saloons on the ground floor. So the men that would stay in the boarding houses, they would get their meals taken care of, they would get a bed to sleep in, and when they came home from a 12-hour shift at the mill, they would have a place to drink. Now, Frank McManus, he wielded a great economic and political power on Irish Hill. He was a Republican, which in those days meant that you were pro-laborer, which I still don't really understand, but he was a Republican, a staunch Republican, and he had a monopoly over the money that came into and left Irish Hill. The entire city of San Francisco knew him as the king of the Potrero, and his antics, for lack of a better word, were pretty much tolerated all over town. This man, today we would call him an Irish gang leader because he was a thug and he had a bunch of guys that followed him around and beat up people that he didn't like. There were beatings, there were knifings, stabbings. Anyone that threatened his monopoly over the boarding house and saloon trade on Irish Hill, well, you'd have to deal with Frank McManus. A lot of the newspaper articles would indicate that he would get into drunken brawls with people. He would go to political rallies and shout things out and get in a fight with the opponent, like a real fist fight. He kept a bear as a pet in his backyard. And it was a brown bear, and he kept it chained up in the backyard. And he and his buddies would drink on a Saturday night, and the bear would drink with them. Well, the bear weighed over 300 pounds, so of course the bear could hold the liquor better than Frank and his buddies could. One night, Frank and his buddies passed out in the backyard, but the bear was way more drunk than they were. He broke free of his chains and went on a rampage through Irish Hill, just terrorizing the neighborhood. I read the article in which he went into a boarding house and he heard a guy upstairs snoring. This bear climbed up the stairs and climbed into bed with the boarder. The boarder was already drunk and thought one of his buddies was playing a trick on him, so he turns around and slugs the bear right in the face. And then he realized it was a bear, and the bear tackled him and started mauling him, and there was screams and cries. Somebody ended up pushing the bear down the stairs, and they got the bear outside, and then everybody started throwing rocks at the bear like it was his fault. The bear lived. And they chained him up again, and tenants and people around there were always complaining about Frank McManus, how he got away with anything he wanted. I mean, a drunken bear, he could get away with anything. He got in a fight with a priest because he didn't like what the priest said about his wife. And so, in a drunken rage, he threw bricks through the stained glass windows of the priest's church. I mean, this was tolerated. It's like, oh, Frank McManus, the king of the Potrero, he's at it again. He finally pushed it too far when he did battle with two other rival hotel owners. He had this monopoly, and two brothers named the Welch brothers, they came and they opened up a hotel that was in the same block as his hotel. And then they opened a hotel across the street. So they had two hotels and he had one. They were Democrats. And there was a big battle that ensued. They called it the Blue Mud Wars because when Frank's gang would take on the Welch brothers' gang, they would fight in the streets, and when it would rain, the blue serpentine rock would turn into this blue mud, and the men were literally in blue mud fighting with clubs and sticks and bats in the street. There was an officer at the Potrero station named Officer Bennett, and he devoted his career to trying to clean up Irish Hill, and he failed miserably, unfortunately. So I was desperately looking for photographs because I couldn't find any photographs, and finally I went to the Maritime Museum. I'd been doing all this research on the Union Hotel. I knew when it opened, when it closed, who owned it, the people who lived there. And then one afternoon, I'm at the Maritime Museum, and I stumbled across this photo from 1918. So I'm looking, and I see the second building over, the building in the middle. Now, if you were standing here, you couldn't get into this because this is the lot where the storage, the affordable storage place used to be. This is 20th Street. 20th Street would go up to Dogpatch over here, eventually to Potrero Hill. You're going down to the bay over here. So you're on 20th Street here, and I checked out this middle building and this car, and I wanted to see what was actually there because I saw some writing on this awning. So my friend blew up the picture, and sure enough, there is the Union Hotel. And finally I found it. I was in the Maritime Museum, and like all the hair on my arms like stood up, and I told the librarian, I said, it's like seeing a ghost. It's like reading about someone and learning about them and then seeing their ghost like face to face. So I finally found the Union Hotel, and there's actually a girl sitting in the car in front. This photograph, the collection that you may have seen in the lobby, these are all from 1918, which is basically the end of Irish Hill's history. Within 2 months of this photograph being taken, all of the buildings that are in the photograph are gone. They were razed. So 1918 pretty much marked the end for Irish Hill. Oh, we'll get to that. Okay, so here is a similar shot. And here we are on the stump of Irish Hill. And you can see the foundations here of those 3 buildings that we saw in the previous photo. Here's the Union Hotel again. So that's the Union Hotel's foundation. When we were walking over here, I actually found the fence posts from the porch. And up on the hill, I was kicking around and I found pieces of marble and porcelain and like a glass marble and all kinds of strange little artifacts up here. What happened with Irish Hill, which is ironic, Irish and other first-generation immigrants came to Potrero Point to work in shipbuilding industries and other industries that were there. The industries went to Potrero Point because it was so far away from more populated areas in San Francisco, and they could make more noise and they could spread more pollution. There were gunpowder factories, there was an oil works for whale oil, and eventually when Union Iron Works came, they were the biggest employer. So Union Iron Works employed all the people most of the people that lived on Irish Hill. Well, after World War I, Union Iron Works, which was then Bethlehem Steel, was flush with cash because they had built so many warships for the US. So they had all this cash, and they decided, well, we're going to expand. The only place they could expand was Irish Hill, where all the people lived that worked there. So slowly but surely, they started buying up land from the families of the owners of the land, and they bought up the land, and a group called the Pacific Improvement Company also started buying up land. Well, I didn't know what this was, but here I find it's a holding company for the Southern Pacific Railroad. So the railroads and the industry, they were tied together because they had mutual interests. California Sugar Refinery bought a lot of the land. San Francisco Gas and Light Company, which was to become PG&E, they bought a lot of the land. So the industries bought up the land for expansion. Now the only problem was that a lot of the land was so hilly that they couldn't expand on it. They bought a lot of the property that you see, that the lower business district down here, they bought all of this and tore it down in 1918. But throughout Irish Hill's history, from 1862 to 1918, there was this pattern of the industries buying up the land and tearing down the houses and eventually excavating the land. There was a plan, I guess at one time, to extend 6th Street to the bay. So, well, if we're going to extend 6th Street, we need to tear down Irish Hill. So they would tear down parts of Irish Hill. The newspaper articles I saw, every so many years there would be some plan, we're going to build a foundry, we're going to extend 6th Street, and then the industry would buy the property and excavate the land. These are boarding houses and hotels that existed on Irish Hill. There's a graph of this outside. These I found in the city directories, which are like the phone books, the precursor to our phone books. These were really hard to find. These took hours because I had to find out, I'm a little meticulous about things like this. I had to find out when they opened, who owned them, and when they closed. So these are the ones I found. If it's red, that indicates that it was a liquor and lodging establishment, probably with a saloon in the ground floor. Then if it's white, that meant it was just a boarding house. And what's interesting is St. Teresa's Church was actually in one of the boarding houses before it moved to Dogpatch. It was Breslin's Hotel was one of the few boarding houses that didn't serve liquor. St. Teresa's had their services there. That was on 22nd and Georgia Street for a few years. And the ones that are gray are just liquor establishments, just straight up liquor. They called them sealed package houses. It would be like a liquor store. So the majority of businesses on Irish Hill were boarding houses and saloons and hotels for the workers that were employed by industrial things. Yeah.
After buying the real estate and leveling the hill, why didn't those people do something with it? I still see the foundation of the Union Hotel is there, which means that nothing was ever done.
Exactly.
What went wrong?
I don't know. You know, that was interesting. When Bethlehem Steel bought all those properties and tore those things down, they had plans to build this like $150,000 concrete foundry right there on that lot where you saw those foundations, and it just never got built. It eventually became a parking lot for Bethlehem Steel executives. I have no idea. That's part of the ongoing kind of investigation. Like, why didn't that land get developed somehow? Because it was prime real estate. It still is. So there were other businesses on Irish Hill too, and there was these were businesses that supported the families. There were grocers and blacksmiths, bootmakers, restaurants. Most of the restaurants were actually part of the boarding houses because the boarders would go there, they could buy a box lunch on their way to work. A lot of the workers had to walk right by these places to go to work, so they would just buy a box lunch for $0.25 on their way. There were barbers, butchers, grocers, like I said, variety stores, bakers, dressmakers, love makers. A lot of the people that lived on Irish Hill, though, I noticed went to Dog Patch for most of their shopping because Dog Patch was a little bigger, it offered more variety, the stores were of a better quality. But there were these kinds of places here.
Is the name Roof up there in blue?
Which one?
Rough.
Oh yeah, these are the last names of the people who own the businesses.
Is that the famous baby roof?
No. No. Actually, one of the guys, you see one of the grocers, McCormick, he was one of the longest lasting businessmen on Irish Hill. And, there's Frank McManus, and he's, not a very savory character. But Patrick McCormick was a first generation Irish immigrant. He came to this country, he rented a room in one of these boarding houses, he worked at the Union Iron Works, worked his way up, saved his money, eventually had a grocery store, turned it into a boarding house, and owned an entire block of Irish Hill right before the end. So there were success stories. When he passed away, he left it to his wife. And there were people that worked really hard on Irish Hill and did well for themselves. A lot of them actually ended up moving to Dog Patch as the properties got bought. So here we are again, the panorama shot. I was telling you earlier about Frank McManus and the Union Hotel. His competitors had their hotel right here. Behind their hotels, that's where Frank McManus's place was. And there was a lot of fighting, a lot of crime on Irish Hill. Life on Irish Hill was very hard. In the newspaper articles, there were a lot of suicides and suicide attempts, men who were down on their luck financially, men who missed their homes and homeland. There were just freak industrial accidents. A little boy was hurt by crashing stones from excavating on 3rd Street or on Kentucky Street. There were horrible accidents. There was a lot of crime. Apparently, people would shoot out the street lights so that it was dark. The city would fix the street lights and then they would shoot them out again, so the city just stopped fixing them. Because of Irish Hill's low status as a neighborhood, it wasn't protected by fire boxes, police boxes. If there was a fire, you'd have to go like 3 blocks to signal the fire department, which was 3 blocks over on Tennessee Street. You could have just walked. There wasn't a lot of water service, so when there was a major fire in 1884, a good portion of Irish Hill actually burned down. And it was one of those things where the fire just burned right up the street. The Union Iron Works, it happened midday, so they stopped working, and they had all of the workers help with the bucket brigade because there was no water, there were no pipes there for Irish Hill. So the men that worked there, they formed a bucket brigade and eventually put out the fire, but 1/5 of the population of Irish Hill was left homeless by that fire. No one was killed though, which was that's good. These are some boarded up buildings that are on Illinois Street. Illinois would run this way, would be parallel to 3rd Street right here. So in Illinois, there were actually 5 other streets that ran parallel to Illinois toward the bay, and these streets no longer exist. They were named after states it went. It was Illinois, Michigan, Georgia, Louisiana, Maryland, Delaware, and Massachusetts Street. So all these streets went to the bay, and none of them are there anymore. Apparently the city named the streets after states because they figured so many people who came to San Francisco were from other parts of the country and they might feel homesick. So if we name these streets after their states, they might feel like, oh, okay, San Francisco's a nice place to live. No, it's interesting, this place is boarded up. This is 19, and some joker wrote on this board, it says Palace Hotel. So they had a sense of humor about the fact that the place was falling apart. This place is boarded up. This place is still open. This is 2 flats. This is a boarding house that has a little restaurant here. Boston baked beans and brown bread, 25 cents. And there's a big giant urn of coffee right there in the window, but that place was still doing business. 20th Street would be on this side, 22nd would be over here. In front of this building, in 1918 was the American Can Company, which was a very big change to come to Irish Hill. A lot of buildings got torn down, and it was an entire city block that got developed for the American Can Company. But it also offered jobs for people.
Same American Can Company behind the Acres Legal?
I would imagine so. I mean, I think that they moved there, I think, in the late teens. I'm pretty sure. This is where the American Can Company actually sits today. So this eventually became a railroad turnaround for Muni, and Muni SFMTA was the one who got me this photo. That business district that we just saw on Illinois Street is right here. This is in December of 1918. This is 5 months after the last photo you saw. All of the buildings were torn down, and the Bethlehem Steel Corporation had built temporary offices. This is an employment office. There were little turnstile thingies here, but they had developed that entire block within just 5 months of tearing down those buildings. Now, what's interesting about this picture, these funny little utility poles, that's my marker for Illinois Street. So here we are on 20th. You're moving toward 22nd. Remember I told you that if you went down 22nd Street, there was a 90-foot cliff that you had to negotiate? There's the cliff right there. What we're looking at today, this cliff is gone and it's been leveled all the way down to street level. So this entire area is gone. This is all flat land. In fact, this part is flat. Back here behind this building is actually excavated 40 feet lower. So in the late 30s, before World War I, this was all taken down. I mean, you can still see there are homes up here on Irish Hill. In 1918, there were no businesses, but just a few homes left. This is the, this would have been the business district, and then this is the cottages and the saloons up here. But you can see this giant hill that rose just like that they eventually had to excavate and move away. So those homes were lost. By 1939, this was all flat land. What I can't understand though is if there was this much construction, if they had to move millions of tons of dirt and rock, why aren't there any photographs of that? If you lived on Potrero Hill or in Dogpatch at that time, this would have been something you heard, this would have been something you saw, there would have been dirt in the air, there would have been train cars moving this stuff. So I know there have got to be photos out there of this summer, I just can't find them.
What is the hill on the left-hand side of the picture? See on the extreme left side, keep going there. That hill in the back.
Oh, that's actually an extension of this. This goes all the way over. So this goes all the way like this. I heard that this hill, 280 was excavated out, and 3rd Street was excavated out, Illinois Street, all of these were cut into the earth because they weren't like that. If you stood on Pennsylvania Street and looked toward the bay, there was a gradual sloping of the hill that went all the way to the bay. So this cut that you see right here actually went all the way up to Pennsylvania Street. And it just a real gentle slope all the way down to the bay.
Which way, in this picture, which way do you walk to go to the bay?
You would walk this way, or you would walk this way. So this would be 20th, these railroad tracks. This actually connects to 20th Street, and this up here was 22nd Street. This is Illinois, 3rd Street.
Awesome.
What's the big structure on the right?
This one here?
Way on the right.
The tank.
Oh, this is a holding tank, like a holding tank for fuel. That's no longer there anymore. There are a few other ones. Apparently the San Francisco Gas and Light Company held giant tanks of heating oil just in case the electrical grid went out. They had this backup. There were also really intense industrial accidents where men fell into this heating oil and just drowned. I mean, these tanks were huge, but nobody really said anything about them being dangerous or anything like that. They were just huge tanks of oil.
What direction, in that last picture, which direction are we looking, north, south, east? What's the direction that the camera's in?
The camera would be, say, on the corner of 20th and 3rd Street, and it would be looking southeast. So you'd be looking southeast this way. Islay Creek would be over here. Hunters Point would be out that way. Again, here's what's left of Iris Hill today. We don't know what's actually going to happen. There are rumors that they're going to leave Iris Hill as it is right now as an open space and maybe just block it off. They don't think that people are going to actually go up on the hill. There are also rumors that they want to cut a street through here. There was actually a street called Shasta Street. It would have been the equivalent of 21st Street. And they kind of want to cut it through here. There's rumors of a parking garage going down here. There are buildings that are going to go up in this area. It is our hope that they at least keep that hill as a remembrance of a place that just doesn't have anything to show what it was. And there's our Irish Hill today. I would love to answer questions for you too if you have any questions.
Giants are up 11-4.
Yeah. Are there any questions? In the black shirt.
Did you find out why Dog Patch is called Dog Patch?
I took the Dog Patch tour, and according to the tour guides through San Francisco City Guides, they said that Dog Patch is named that way because there was a little Abner cartoon that had Dog Patch as the name of where he lived, and I don't know what the connection of Little Abner is to that. There was also a rumor that in Butchertown, which was south of Dog Patch, that the industries that slaughtered cows would often just leave the entrails in the streets, and packs of wild dogs would come and eat that, so they called it Dog Patch, because the dogs would actually be down in that area too. One in the hat.
You mentioned that you found a lot of traditional businesses. We can remember the days of World War II and just before, and that area, specifically 20th and 3rd, had the world's oldest businesses being operated.
You know, I've heard this too, and they were not in the city directories, unfortunately. I've heard they were there, and unfortunately a lot of businesses that were like that were not in the city directory, so I've read things like that too. I mean, this was a predominantly working class neighborhood. There were many men that lived there, but it's interesting too, the diversity that there were Russians and there were British people and Scots, and there were families, and there were non-traditional families, and there were widows and brothers and sisters who lived together, but I'm sure there were businesses like that too. Yes?
So these people were not very affected by the earthquake?
No, they weren't. There was hardly any damage in this area from the 1906 earthquake. I did see a picture of a ship that had been slightly capsized, and there was some industrial equipment there that had been lost. One of the docks or something had gotten messed up. But the area itself wasn't affected by the 1906 earthquake. In fact, when the South of Market area was pretty much decimated by the 1906 earthquake, the people from South of Market, a lot of them moved over to Irish Hill because the rents were about the same. Some of them came to Dog Patch, and the area in 1906 actually saw some growth. Yes?
Do you know roughly the ethnic populations of either Irish Hill or Dog Patch or Potrero? We've mentioned the Russians and you mentioned the British.
Right. The ethnic breakdown for people in Irish Hill, there are, I've looked at the census results for about 200, so I've got about 800 to go. But what I'm seeing is about half of the people were Irish, so half of the people were of Irish descent. Of those half of the population in the sample that I looked at, half of them were first-generation immigrants and half of them were second-generation immigrants. There were also people, though Irish were the majority, there were people that were Irish American or Irish Scottish. There were Russians and Italians. There was an Australian. So there was kind of a melting pot, but like I said, predominantly Irish. I'm going to be looking at the rest of the census results too, because they show actually where people were born, where the children were born, where the mother's family came from, where the father's family came from. But it's very interesting. You have another question?
Can you, a little bit aside from this, but right in the same neighborhood, do you know why Army Street was called Army Street? Was it an appreciation for what the Army did in the earthquake or the Spanish-American War? Why was it called Army Street?
It was something to that effect, but I'm not sure when it was named Army Street. Army Street was, what we call Cesar Chavez Street. I don't know why it was called Army Street. I mean, that sounds like a viable reason. I'm not really sure. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions? Yes?
Is Irishville part of the Pier 70 project?
Yes, it is. Actually, there are two developers, the Orton developers, and there's the Forest City, and they've been really nice to the historians that work in that area, and they are actually in the plans of rehabilitating some of the buildings, and they have their own historians too. There's a port historian who's very interested in the work we're doing too, so we're sharing the work that Potrero Hill Archives and the Bethlehem Shipyard Museums, we're all working together to share what we know about this area in hopes that we can educate people once these areas are developed to see what made those areas, to see the history behind these important areas that people might not know.
Even though they're the ones who may be leveling Irishville?
That's a strange point. Okay, so in the 1860s, industry came to Potrero Point, and then people came to Potrero Point, and then the industries pushed the people out of Potrero Point, and now we're putting people back into Potrero Point. So it's this ebb and flow thing that San Francisco is so known for, but it's very fascinating to me that it keeps going back and forth. And now they're developing Pier 70. It's not going to be necessarily an industrial area. What we call industry would be like tech or something like that, but there are going to be a lot of people living there too, so it's gone back and forth. Yes?
My understanding is that the port has definitely committed to saving the remnants of Irish Hill.
Excellent.
And most likely it will be some sort of a public space and maybe kids' playground kind of area.
That would be great.
Kids could slide down Irish Hill.
It's pretty awesome. In the back of Irish Hill, which you don't really see, there's this beautiful cliff of blue rock with white streaks through it. It's really beautiful, and you can see at the bottom of this cliff that they have actually cut buildings right into the rock. I mean, the rock was there, and they're like, oh, we want this building's wall to be here, so we're going to cut this part out and put the wall right there. But that's really good news, because you'd see me in the newspaper if it was going to be any different than that.
Did police ever crack down on the bars in Irish Hill?
Did police crack down on the bars? Good question. They tried. They really tried. There was one of the newspaper articles that I saw, one of the major events in Irish Hill's history was called Fierce Fight on Irish Hill. And it was one of the few articles that actually mentioned Irish Hill in the headline. Apparently there were a lot of people who sold liquor without a liquor license. So there was a lot of whiskey flowing one night from some woman who owned a tavern, and she didn't have a liquor license, but she owned a tavern anyway. I don't know how that worked. But cheap whiskey flowed, and there was a huge fight, and Officer Bennett of the Potrero station came and tried to break up the fight, and they drove him off. So he had to go get more police officers and come, and it was pretty much a fight in the street with clubs and rocks and knives. It was just completely primitive. It seemed that on Irish Hill there were rules, but they were usually broken, and when it came to liquor, liquor was king. I mean, a lot of liquor was consumed there. The police tried to stop what went on there, but Frank McManus, it is my theory that he had ties with the police, and he kept a lot of the police activity from at least interfering with his business. There was an article in which he was walking down the street, waving to everybody, and had his arm around Officer Bennett, like, oh, this guy's in my pocket, and just waving to everyone like just a king. Well, he's the king of the Potrero. But yeah, there was a lot of shadiness there. Yes?
I want to add something to what you said about restoration of some of the buildings. The plans are available online. So I researched about a week ago, and I found all the things that got approved and what buildings are going to be restored. But a very interesting thing, at least to me, was a story that my father-in-law used to relate to people, and that they brought some contractors to open up the spaces, redo the walls and so on. So those contractors subcontracted other people because there was a lot of work to be done at one time. So at a certain moment in time, opening one of the walls, they found inside huge bags with gold nuggets. So then the main contractor took everybody out of that specific hall, and then whatever happened to the gold nuggets, nobody knows that it took off. So then what you want to pay attention that this situation may repeat. You know, in your restoration, so maybe be aware.
Yeah, thank you. That would be great. It could really fund some of the research I've been doing. We actually got onto Irish Hill, some of the historians and I was just kicking the dirt, and I found, I mean, there's stuff up there with pieces of porcelain, a big piece of marble, glass marbles, a jewel from a chandelier, bricks of all sorts. What happened was when they bulldozed the buildings, they just knocked them down and kind of smoothed them out. You can just go up there on the hill and just kick dirt and you'll find something. There were actually places where it had somehow been shorn, and you could just pick pieces of plates and glassware right out. I mean, everything's just up there, it's just kind of buried. We actually want to go up there with metal detectors. I found a few railroad spikes up there, a few nails, but there's got to be stuff up there too. Thank you. Yes.
Another question. As the Southern Pacific Railroad goes south from 16th Street, it plunges into a couple of tunnels. I think there's 2 tunnels there, and finally it emerges near Army Street. Why did the railroad dig those tunnels when they could have moved the railroad just a block or so, just 1 block towards the bay, and they would have gone around the foot of the hill and wouldn't have had to dig those tunnels?
You know, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know why they didn't. The question is about why did the Southern Pacific Railroad dig tunnels instead of going overland? It could have been property rights. There were a lot of dealings, though, in which the city would grant a deed to a piece of property to the Southern Pacific Railroad. They would just, here it is, here, we're giving it to you. The Southern Pacific Railroad, in turn, would buy property from owners, and it was called a quitclaim or something like that, and people would sell their land for as little as $10. A lot of the real estate transactions from Irish Hill, property was sold for as little as $10, but I don't know why it was that the Southern Pacific Railroad would dig the tunnels instead of going around it, unless it was a land thing where they couldn't get the land deed. They did, yeah, they did. Santa Fe, see, that's why I think that the railroad and the industries, everything was tied together there, and it just seemed that somebody's hand was in somebody's pockets, and they're like, look, this is good for all of us if we own this land. So, yeah, I think that's what happened.
That cliff that you mentioned,
yes,
prevents 22nd Street going to the Irish Hill.
Right.
Was that a man-made, was it excavated, or was it the natural?
It was excavated to make Illinois Street, and it was actually part of that hill, if you want to block up, was also excavated to make Kentucky or 3rd Street. And a lot of that rock, we found an article where there was a big chunk of that rock at 20th and 3rd Street. So if you were going up 20th Street toward Dogpatch from the bay, you actually had to go around this giant chunk of rock that they eventually blew up. There was so much rock there that, yeah, that it just eventually got excavated away.
So that was earlier than
yeah, that was earlier. Exactly. That was that clip was probably done before the 1860s. Yeah. There's actually a newspaper article about a man who was drinking with his friends and got disoriented when he left his friend's house, and it was dark, and he ended up falling off that cliff and landed on a water pipe that was sticking out, and he broke his back, but he lived. And you know, these were the kinds of articles that it was just very treacherous terrain to begin with.
So if McManus was king of the Potrero, but he was down in Dogpatch on Irish Hill, was that considered at that time part of Potrero Hill?
You know, they called it the Potrero, so the Potrero would actually encompass, he's asking if Patrick, or if Frank McManus was, considered part of the Potrero because of where he lived, and the Potrero actually encompassed all those areas, so it would be Potrero Hill, Dog Patch, and Irish Hill was all considered the Potrero. So a lot of the articles refer to it as the Potrero. That's why it was really hard to find articles that just said specifically Irish Hill.
And was there economic diversity between the people who lived up on Potrero Hill and those who lived in...
Oh, definitely. If you lived in Irish Hill, I mean, that was the poorer area. So the people on Irish Hill, that was lower socioeconomic status. If you moved up a little bit, and a lot of people moved to Dog Patch once they had their own businesses. If they bought a business on Irish Hill, they would live at that place. That would be their residence. And eventually, if the residents, or if they were doing well business-wise, they would move to Dog Patch or to Potrero Hill. There was a lot of movement upwards that way physically, too.
And I notice your middle name is Fidel. I'm guessing you're not Irish.
I'm not Irish, no. Everyone asks that, they're like, what's your connection to this? And I don't know, it just started off, like I said, like a curiosity, but it's this thing about looking for something that doesn't exist anymore, and it's fascinating to me, and every day I learn something new, and just making a connection that, oh yeah, there was a valley there, oh, here's a picture of that bridge that went across, and descriptions in the newspaper of somebody climbing up the 98 stairs and walking down a slow path in the rose gardens and a tiny little cottage on your right, and just really, I think it was a really beautiful place, but we have very few photographs of it, so. Thank you, everyone.